can start. For those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Terry Starrett. This is I am the new president of Rodef Shalom, Women of Rodef Shalom, and as some people call it, the sisterhood. And I'd like to welcome you to this event, which is Just Mercy, and a discussion about the social action, about what happened in the movie, and about our society. Also, just a little bit about the Women of Rodef Shalom. And we do a lot of activities and sponsorships, like providing books for the library, providing fresh flowers each week at services, sponsoring Omegs and Kiddushes after evening and morning services, and in a lot of ways doing different fundraising to monetarily support the preschool, the religious school, and the congregation. So we really do try to do a lot of outreach and a lot of help. And if you like this event and appreciate what we're doing, you can show your support by becoming a member of the Women of Rodef Shalom, or if not, just making a small donation if you'd like to. We also, I really would like to thank Rabbi Henry for all the work she's put in to preparing for this discussion group, and Dr. Alfonso Wells for being here with us and really helping us on the other side, to understand coming from your perspective as well. And so I'm really looking forward to this, and thank you all for being here and joining us.
Okay, so Shawn, Dr. Alfonso Wells, maybe you could just a couple line bio for us, those of us who don't know your work.
Oh, sure. My name is Shawn Alfonso Wells. I am, my research area is on Cuba, race, identity, Latin America. I also do some work in gender studies. I work at Pitt, CMU, and CMU, both. I teach adjunct there at CMU in the history department, and Pitt in the Africana Studies and Anthropology departments. I also work currently in the study abroad department. I have many, many, many different hats.
Wait, what was the last one you said?
Study abroad.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's quiet now, right? No one's studying abroad.
No one is studying abroad. It was the perfect move if I wanted to be quiet. So.
Okay. So I'm Rabbi Henry, Sharon Henry. So we are pleased to be able to put on have this conversation. Let me tell you how we structured it. So I imagine that most of you have seen the film Just Mercy. Raise your hand if you've seen it. Some of you may also have read the book. Olivia and I and Tim. Okay, good. So it's the film is sort of I should say it this way. The book has every other chapter is not about Walter McMillian. It's about another injustice, another area in the system where there's injustice with respect to incarceration, the death penalty, so he goes every other chapter is about Walter McMillian, and the film pretty much focuses on Walter McMillian. And I think also to a certain extent, it's a memoir of Bryan Stevenson's work. From what I've read about him, he doesn't really have much of a life outside of work. I tried to read up a little bit about him, and he basically says he's married to his work, and that's the thing. So it's a good thing because he's doing amazing work. So I just wanted to say about Bryan Stevenson. He is the founder of what's called the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama. And one of the first cases that he took was this case of Walter McMillian, this person who was convicted of and sent to death row for a murder that he didn't do. Totally made up evidence, nothing, there was no evidence, totally made up story, there's no evidence. And so that was what got him, that was his first case, but he had come to Alabama from Harvard. But I wanted to read to you. So he, at one point, this is towards the end, at one point, he gets invited to to go and listen to, which I love, listen to Rosa Parks. He has a friend who's friends with Rosa Parks. And instead of saying, come talk with it, and is come listen to, which I think is what, like listen to her, have her, she could teach you. She could teach you. It must have been, he was so excited and happy to be able to do that. And he said he listened for 2 hours. They were talking, and then Mrs. Rosa Parks said to him, now Bryan, tell me who you are and what you're doing. I just want to read to you what he said he was doing, because it's basically like he opened his mouth and all these things came out. It's a nice introduction to the kinds of work that he did. He said, well, I have a law project called the Equal Justice Initiative. Wait, sorry, I'm gonna need my reading glasses. Oh. I have a law project called the Equal Justice Initiative, and we're trying to help people on death row. We're trying to stop the death penalty, actually. We're trying to do something about prison conditions and excessive punishment. We want to free people who've been wrongly convicted. We want to end unfair sentences in criminal cases and stop racial bias in criminal justice. We're trying to help the poor and do something about indigent defense and the fact that people don't get the legal help they need. We're trying to help people who are mentally ill. We're trying to stop them from putting children in adult jails and prisons. We're trying to do something about poverty and the hopelessness that dominates poor communities. We want to see more diversity in decision-making roles in the justice system. We're trying to educate people about racial history and the need for racial justice. We're trying to comfort abuse of power by police and prosecutors. He said, I realized that I'd gone on way too long, and he stopped abruptly, and they were all looking at him. And Rosa Parks leaned in smiling. She says, ooh, honey, all that's going to make you tired, tired, tired. And then she says to him, that's why you have to be brave, brave, brave. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the case, the Macmillan case, which actually you do know it because you've all seen everyone raise their hand, right? So you know it. You know that it was 1996 that he was arrested for a murder that there had been 6 months after the murder happened. There wasn't a suspect. There wasn't anything, and he was arrested. He spent 15 months on death row before his trial even began, and then 6 more years on death row after his trial. He was finally released after prosecutors agreed the case had been mishandled. In the film, that looks like a big surprise to everyone, but in fact, they all knew going into the trial that that was what was going to happen. And he was released in 1993, and I think he lived about 10 more years. He ended up having like early onset dementia, probably from all the trauma that he had endured. So my first question to, is it Shawn? What would you like me to call you, Shawn?
Yeah, just call me Shawn. We're amongst friends here, and I'm not teaching any classes right now.
So, I'm Shawn. So when we talked on the phone the other day, I said that I was going to start with this question, which was, is this a story that's peculiar to that time, which would have been the 80s, the 90s actually, and in the South, in the deep South in Alabama, or do you see this as something that's not peculiar to time and space?
Oh, so definitely do not see this as something peculiar to time and space. This is something historically that has happened. As you see in the movie, you see it happening a lot in the South, but it's not exclusive to the South, right? You also, right now with what happened with George Floyd, you absolutely see it happening right this minute. In fact, just before we came on the call, I saw that they were looking at a case, Elijah McClain, I think in Colorado, 26, stopped by the police because he was walking home at night and had a mask on and looked suspicious. Because he was he's walking home with an iced tea in a shopping bag, walking, not bothering anybody, just walking, and he's dead. And why is he dead? Why is it that you have an encounter with the police and you're dead, or you have an encounter with the police and you're in jail? I don't think that any of these incidences are something that only happened in the past. I think they're happening right now. They haven't stopped, which is why a lot of people are very angry right now and trying to change things. I wish it was something that I could say, oh, that was back then and now it's so much better, but that's not true. And I think it's a big fallacy to think that only these types of things happen in the South. They happen here every day, all the time. The Central Park Five, right? That was, that wasn't that long ago that they got exonerated. And if it could happen down there, it could definitely happen up here. And the reason it's able to happen is because people aren't paying attention. They're not looking at it. They're thinking, they believe in all the stereotypes and the cop shows, which they have now canceled. The majority of the cop shows that they had, bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? They've canceled those because what they do is they set you up to think about people as criminals, right? And that the cops are the good guys who are riding in and stopping this criminal behavior. What happened to innocent until proven guilty, right? And they make it look, they make it look as if, any everyday activity that you're doing is suspicious. And in addition, the majority of the people that they tend to stop, are Black or poor, or poor and Black, which is even worse. And that's what you see. And so your images of people of color, your images of crime are being formed by these shows, right? That show you that, oh, if a poor person is walking down the block and he looks jittery, it's not because he has some type of an illness, it's because he must be a drug addict, right? If someone's walking at 11 o'clock at night, he must be getting ready to rob somebody. If you're walking in this particular neighborhood at 10 o'clock at night and you don't look like what the residents are supposed to look like, then you must be doing something. And I think it helps, those shows help to justify what the police have been doing.
So I forgot to mention that what we would do would be talk a little bit. At any point, anyone has a question, you could put it in the chat, or you could raise your, go like this so that, Olivia, can you see everybody? Because I can't. I should say that that's Olivia Tucker up there with the lavender, and they'll be taking care of her technology, but.
There is a raise hand function. You should have it if you click on participants, and then I should be able to see you in the participant scroll.
So we'd be happy to take questions as it's going. So, so Shawn, yes, the other day when we were talking, we talked about different times that you had been stopped, or people that we both, that I knew about that had been stopped. Do you? I lost my question. Do you? I lost my question.
Well, what about this, right? Because after you asked me that question, I just happened to, I was looking at something on YouTube, and someone came on and they were talking about how they were stopped by the police, a Black woman. And she was listing all the times she had been stopped by the police. And I was thinking about our conversation, and I have been stopped by the police several times. And most of the time, I mean, aside from some random speeding, right? I would dare say that most people have sped at some point when the logic is you can go 10 miles above the speed limit. So if you can find me someone that's never gone 10 miles above the speed limit, you will find a very rare unicorn. But most people have at some point gone 10 miles over the speed limit. But so aside from, I think I've been stopped once for speeding, and that was in Florida. It was really weird. It was late at night, and I have since learned, never put your brakes on. If you're on cruise control, just hit the cruise control button. Don't put the brakes on. It just announces that you're speeding. But I was thinking back on all the incidences when I have been stopped by the cops. And the first time I was like 18, 19 years old, all I was doing was driving on, I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York. It was a nice sunny day. It was a beautiful day. I just remember how beautiful the day was. I mean, it was gorgeous outside. And anybody who's ever been in, I'm a native New Yorker. So for me, it's upstate New York. I think some people call it West New York or something like that. But those are only people who don't live in New York City, right? New Yorkers, it's upstate, right? And I just remember that day I had gotten my registration in the mail. It had just come in, and I had driven up the hill to pick up my mail. I had the mail in the car, and I was driving up the hill, or, I'm driving up the hill on campus, and it's just such a lovely day. And as I'm driving, I'm smiling. I'm a smiler. I love to smile. I'm just a smiley person. And I'm smiling, and I'm just like, wow, this is just a gorgeous day. And I'm very excited. And I look, and coming down the hill opposite to me is a police car. And I don't know, I don't think anything of it. I just smile. I make eye contact with the police officer, and I just smile, and I keep going. She turns around, puts on her lights, pulls me over in the middle of campus. I mean, like where everybody is. And here I am in my little car, and I'm confused because I wasn't speeding. I wasn't doing anything. All I was doing was smiling. And she tells me that my registration looked funny enough that she had to pull me over. So what if I hadn't had the new registration had just come in the mail? I can't even begin to tell you what it felt like to be stopped at that moment. Like, I had incredible joy for the day, and I'm just stopped. I mean, that was my first occurrence of being stopped while Black, just because I'm enjoying myself. Right on Pitt's campus, right by the Carnegie Library. If any of you are familiar with CMU Buggy Races, they usually have these weird it's a CMU thing, right? So I think it's the springtime, they close down all the roads to campus, and the kids get in these little maddening small vehicles, and tiny little people are in there. I don't know how they get these people in, but they're little tiny people, and they're zipping around in these vehicles. So they close off all traffic. Well, I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to get to my office on campus, and I realize, oh, I can't get to my office on campus, but I'm just trying. I said, well, I'll go to my Pitt office. As I'm driving, I am facing towards the Shanley Drive. The Carnegie Library is to my left. Frick Fine Arts is to my right. I'm at the light, and I see a school bus in front of me. It is past the light, right? It is being turned around because the road is closed, and it backs up and it turns around. And I say to myself, oh, well, the road is closed, so I can't go that way. So let me just turn around. The light turns green. I do a U-turn. Cop lights come on. I'm like, what? I get stopped. And as she's asking for my ID and information, I said, well, did you just see the school bus turn around in front of you? She said, no, she didn't see the school bus. I said, well, do you see that the road is closed? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm sitting there thinking I'm in an alternate reality. I said, well, can you please call your supervisor, because all the roads are closed. I mean, we're right there. I don't know how she cannot see that the road is closed. The police have put up a barricade because the road is closed. And yet I'm being pulled over, and my license is being run. And this is not the only time. I was stopped there again a second time. And this time I wasn't even turning, nothing. And I was also stopped a second time in that same location. So I don't know what it is about that particular area and a Black woman driving a minivan that seems so suspicious, because I'm not sure what it is, but I'm stopped. I don't get tickets. I say I work here, but it shouldn't matter. Why am I being stopped? I don't understand.
So you do know what you're being stopped. You're being stopped
yes.
for Black. So I want to think about, like, in the movie, there's that scene where, and Doug has his hand raised, so we'll get to you in a second, Doug. There was a scene where Bryan Stevenson is pulled over. I saw that as intimidation. I don't think it was random that they just pulled over a Black guy. I thought it was him in particular. I might have been wrong about that. But, it's, so this comes from attitudes that people have about calling the police, right? So this whole rationale of people calling the police on Black people for bird watching and other really dangerous things that they're doing. And then, so there's this, it seems to be like a cultural problem that, that so many people are operating on stereotypes. On the other side of it, when my kids were little, we had au pairs. They were all like beautiful, young German 19-year-old girls. And they got stopped by police who just like had a great time flirting with them. They never got in any trouble. No matter what they did wrong, it was just a fun time for the police to pull over these pretty girls. And, we used to say, wow, like if we had done that, not so sure the police would have been so understanding. So, I guess we know why you're being pulled over. Is there something that's, is there anything that we can do about that? Or do you want to say more about policing in the African-American community? And I'm going to look at Doug's question in the meantime.
Well, I think it's problematic, right? That you can't be a regular person, a normal person. I am constantly pulled out of my reality. Anytime I think that life is good, that I'm just enjoying being a human being, you're constantly reminded that you can't enjoy being a human being because you sat in a Starbucks for 5 extra minutes and you happen to be Black, or those are the types of things that constantly tell you that you're a second-class citizen in this country, which is problematic. I have full rights. I was born here. And even if I wasn't born here and I was legalized here, and even if I was a visitor and I was a resident here, I should still expect to have the same rights as everybody else. And it should not be a question that, that's a problem. I am a relatively benign looking person, relatively speaking, but what about my children? Why is it that I have to teach my son, who's now 15 and just the sweetest, kindest child ever, right? Why do I have to teach him that he has to be careful every time he goes out the house because, the police thinks he looks suspicious? Not for any way he walks, but just for being Black while he's walking.
So Doug asked, I don't know, Doug, if you want to ask your own question, or Doug asked a question. Looks like Rabbi Bisno has a question.
Yeah, so my question is, you're an educated person in a well-respected position. Have you had the courage to contact these police departments that are pulling you over for no apparent reason? I can't imagine like most Black men would want to bring that kind of attention to themselves. And I don't know if you feel the same way.
That is a good question. So I have never, it has never occurred to me to call the police department and say, hey, I was pulled over. Why are your guys pulling me over? I have been, because I don't want any other consequences. Interestingly enough, in my other life, I am also a councilwoman of Swissvale. And my fellow council person, who this is the first year that 2 African Americans have been on the council, female at that, historic. And she is a resident. She just became a council person. And I think 2 meetings ago, she was talking about being stopped by the police. I was like, wow. And apparently she complained about it, but she complained about it in a public meeting, and it was because something else was being brought up. I think it's very difficult for people to even realize that they can and should complain. And we should, but why is it that systemically we're taught to, wow, you escaped. Don't say anything, you escaped, right? Because what could happen once you start to say something? Will they, pull me over more? Will they then have me on some type of a Black list? That I'm saying that tongue in cheek, that, then they notice when I'm driving by? I don't know, but that's a real good question, Doug.
Rabbi Bisno had your hand up.
I want to just say something before Rabbi Bisno, is that in the book, that scene where Bryan Stevenson is pulled over happens sort of before that, just in a different part of his life. But it happens rather similarly, that some white cops in a SWAT car pull him over because he's listening to music, enjoying some music on the radio outside of his own house in his car. And they pull out their gun immediately, and he starts saying, it's okay, and trying to calm that officer's emotions down as they start ransacking his car, doing illegal searches, which he thinks about trying to interrupt.
Hold on. What, Aaron?
Okay, Got it. You were highlighting a piece in the movie where Bryan Stevenson
So yeah, I'm
experiences.
recounting the scene specifically in relation to Doug's question, right? Because after this horrible and unconstitutional moment, he does report it to the system. Gets told, you know, policing's a hard job and you should be more forgiving. And he repeals that, and he really starts working and trying to get them to acknowledge that they've really violated his rights. And every stage along the way, they refuse to hear that. So I just wanted to give you, Doug, that example from Bryan's book about what happens if you do try to appeal. Private business.
Thank you. So, Shawn, you shared with us these very powerful experiences, and I don't know if anyone saw earlier in the week, it was a really beautiful profile in the Wall Street Journal of Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, where he also describes these kinds of experiences even by Capitol Hill police, who mistake him, a senator, even with the lapel pin, for clearly not being who he portends or appears to be, because he doesn't appear to be to them a senator, because he's an African American. But the allowing that our conversation is about just mercies, but it's a launching pad, and allowing that because the police carry guns and are empowered and have immunity and all kinds of things, these terrible excesses, horrific excesses, are often swept under the rug or moved aside or moved along. Most of the people of color, I suspect, have experiences like yours and like Senator Scott's, wherein they're not at the egregious level of horrible violence, but are the everyday obstacles and everyday prejudices that continue to remind you of, if you will, the place a person of color holds in society because of the larger expectations or beliefs that a society includes. Yes? And so I'm willing to be quiet and listen to continue to talk about police, which is an important piece. But in the same way as you haven't thought to champion that particular issue, in spite of your experiences at the hands of the police, these kinds of biases, prejudices, racisms exist in all of us everywhere, and they show up in all kinds of places. So I would imagine there have been times when you might have contested it or spoken up in an academic situation, or perhaps in an employment situation. And I'm not putting you on the spot. I don't mean to suggest that there are certain venues where we do speak up, but the question becomes, how do we move beyond that? How do we not only get good police officers, how do we get good school teachers, and how do we get good rabbis for that matter? You know, I'll conclude with this. The theologian, 19th century G.K. Chesterton, no friend of the Jews, but when he was asked what the greatest problem of religion was, his response was, I am. Right? And if the reason this is such an unsettling, discomforting, crucially important conversation is because we're all a little bit racist. If you remember that piece from Avenue Q, remember that song? Which isn't to make light of it. It's only to say it's embedded in with all of us. It's also baked into the system, and it's also, right? So what can you offer us by way of saying, what should we be doing? We well-intentioned people who now have a mirror held up to us, and we realize, in the words of Elie Wiesel, while we may not all be guilty, we're all responsible.
Well, I think the first step people have to take is to realize that there's a problem, right? Because a lot of people don't see it as a problem. They don't see that that there's something systemic that's going on. They don't realize it, right? So you have to be aware of it. And when you see something happening, you have to take note. You have to be a witness. You can't let these things pass by. We're living in a time where you have cell phones, right? So, you know, if enough people are filming it, because apparently in our society, you don't believe it if you don't see it on film, you have to film it. You have to stand up. You have to talk. But that's all to certain degrees, right? I would never say to put your life in danger at the moment, but I know for myself, anytime I see somebody that's been pulled over by the cops, particularly someone brown, I look very hard. I try to take note of what's going on, depending on where I am at the time. Like some places you can't stop, right? You can stop and look and see what's happening. You know, I try not to be quiet, particularly in that regard. And right now, I think we're at a moment where people can make more change. We have to think systemically about what it is that we're doing. It's not just, you can't just say, well, you know, take away the police department. you have to put something in place. You have to understand what it is that you're going to do in place of the police department, right? There are other countries that have different types of solutions. If any of you have seen, I think it's Michael Moore did a film called, what was his film called? Where to Invade Next, I believe. And I think it was that one that he actually showed a prison system. It was probably in the Netherlands or Finland or Switzerland. It was one of those countries, right? And it was amazing because the idea was not that the people were in prison to be punished, but the people were in prison to be rehabilitated. And because that was the central theme behind why they were imprisoning people, the results were different. How they treated them was different. They did not lose their rights to vote, right? When they were there, they were treated very humanely. They weren't locked up in the same way. I mean, it actually looked like they were away at a resort. So that tells you something. If someone from the United States looks and says, wow, they look like they're at a luxury resort, and they aren't. We have to look at why these systems are in place. What purpose do they serve? And we have to try to make a change. If we just sit back and say, oh, well, it doesn't affect me, it does. It does affect each and every one of us, whether we see it at first or not, right? A lot of these prisons that are, and a lot of them are here in Pennsylvania, unfortunately, but a lot of these prisons, these for-profit prisons, these prisoners, why is it that you've heard before about the southern states would count Black people as 3/5 of a person, right? So they would count all the enslaved people on the plantation so that they could get representation for the white citizens based on how many Black citizens that they have. That system still exists, right? They don't call it the 3/5 system anymore, but populations and representations are based on how many people they have in those prisons, but they're not allowed to vote, right? And that system, that type of system still exists. And we still say, oh, well, those people need jobs. Well, instead of trying to find them good jobs, what are we doing? We're locking more people up, So it is something that we need to change, but we have to think of ways in which to change it because it's systemic. It's embedded in our society. It's very hard to get away from it.
So that's what I'd like to, it looks like Andy was going to say something. I wanted to sort of move away from this particular thing, but go ahead, Andy.
I'm sort of moving away from it. So let's say we're looking at just mercy in the prison system, but we're looking at it as a microcosm of the system. So he's trying to fix a system that's broken, but it's a small part of the system. The system is much bigger when you're talking about systematic racism. The prison is a symptom of what's happening in the wider culture as I'm seeing it, as I saw it looking at the movie. So I don't know if that's a topic you wanted to bring up. That's a bigger topic than just the movie. It's talking about what's really happening. You're talking about being pulled over. You're talking about what's happening when, whether you have money or not to pay your bail to get out, or you're sitting there waiting for a year or 2 years before you even go to trial. So it's all these other things that show what happens in the prison, which while the system is awful, there's a lot more to it than what was in the movie in just the prison system. Sorry, Sharon.
No, it's okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about racism and, well, I want to talk about lynching actually, because so much of what's happening right now, it really can't be separated out from what's been happening for 400 years. We just found different ways. He talks a lot about in the book about different ways of enslaving people, or anyone ever hear of called a conflict slave, where you could so there's all kinds of things that people do, and I think the prison system.
Convict leasing.
What?
Convict leasing?
No, convict leasing, right? Convict leasing, which I only learned about from reading this book. So yet another way, and maybe you could talk about that. So I wanted to just talk about lynching, just because I feel like this was lynching. This is what they were doing. When you and I spoke the other day, we talked about what was behind lynching, and a lot of us that it has to do, it is both to do with particularly young Black men being inappropriate to a white woman. So there's a lot of fear of the Black male and the white woman having sex or touching, that she's so afraid of him. So, if you go to the memorial in Montgomery, which I've been to, the lynching memorial, you see sign after sign about this kid was 14 years old and he was lynched because he smiled at a white woman. This one was 15 years old and was lynched because he knocked on the door of a white woman. I mean, these are the kinds of things. And it occurred to me that in this story, and it's not really a story, it's a real life thing. The police didn't have anything. They still don't know who killed this woman, this Rhonda Morrison. Nobody knows who killed her, although there had been a suspect, and I'm not sure a white person, I'm not sure what happened. But so the people were angry that there had been no arrest, and that they're also angry that Walter had an affair with a white woman. That was like, he wasn't supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. And so they were going to kill him. And, they wanted him dead. And it didn't really matter that he had nothing to do with it. No one ever listened. It was, I feel like it was just, that was his crime, was he had sex with a white woman. You mentioned, Shawn, I think this is really interesting, that also the other part of lynching has to do with economics, and that sometimes people were lynched because they had a competitive, or someone imagined that they had a competitive business. And in this movie, although we don't really know how successful or how competitive the lumbering business that he had, you mentioned that it could have been connected to that. In the book, he just spends a lot of time talking, though, about this sexual impropriety and how it just makes people like enraged.
Right. I mean, part of when I said, like, for him specifically, right, the fact that he was a Black business owner, right? Oh, how dare you? How dare you be a Black business owner and think that you can just come here and whatever. You see a lot of that issue of, well, you need to show me proper respect, even if I'm not a business owner, even if I'm not as educated as you, even you definitely see that. Ida B. Wells did a pivotal study right after Reconstruction, where something happened in her life where her best friends were murdered. Her best friends were murdered. I think it was both the husband and the wife. They were lynched. They had a successful business, and she started thinking, because she thought, like most people at the time thought, was that, oh, well, he got too uppity, right? Because that was a problem. Black people were getting uppity and they didn't know their place. And maybe he said something, because they said he had whistled at a white woman, or he said something to a white woman, or he did something disrespectful. But when she started looking into the cases of lynching, what she found was, in a lot of cases, there were successful business owners and their businesses were in competition with some of the white businesses in town, right? In addition, you have places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Rosewood, where you have successful businesses and people don't like that. And then what's a way to get rid of them? Well, you trump up charges. So you have the two things going on. One, the idea that you're trying to get rid of this competition. You don't, and then the second part is you don't want them to get out of their place socially, right? Because how dare they look at, a white woman? How dare they talk to me? Right. And in many cases, that was the only thing that made some groups of people, particularly poor whites in the South, that was the only thing that they could hold on to. Right. Because they were treated just as bad. They had no jobs either. They were also working in the fields and doing other types of things. So this was a way of making sure that they stayed in their places. They used to have picnics. I mean, when I think of that, it's enraging. It's horrifying to think that people brought their children, right? They brought their children to see people getting lynched. That was like oh, we have something to do today. Let's do this after church, right? And to think that this is what you would do for entertainment, that's what Black bodies are there for entertainment, is excruciate.
So wait, I see that you have a question, Deb, hold on one sec. So there's been a couple of questions that have come up in the chat about the police and restructuring the police system, like for example, in, I don't know where, Eleanor, you said Camden?
Sharon,
Sharon,
can I interrupt for just 1 second? Sisterhood is going to be doing a discussion. I don't know if it's planned yet, but that they're working on with Erica Strausberger and Dan Frankel about discussing defunding the police, what it means and what's been done. So it's okay to get into it, but I wanted to let you know that we're doing that in July. Okay,
but what I guess what I wanted to say is good, because I see it as all just part, as you said, it's all part of a system, and the police it's all racism, right? It's all racism. What you and I talked about the other day, Shawn, was when people say, you know, our system is broken, my response is actually it's working exactly the way it was set up to work.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
How can we fix that?
What?
How can we fix that?
Okay, you can refute that, but Deb had her hand up first.
Oh, I was just going to respond to something that Shawn said about families, you know, picnics to watch the lynching. I think it's not just entertainment, it's acculturation. It is teaching the children that this is part of what we do. And this is our culture, and this is how we manage this problem, right? I think it's, I'm not sure if it's bigger than entertainment, but I think it's this intergenerational transmission of a certain set of behaviors and teaching them what's appropriate.
Right. And this is what happens when you cross the line, right? Because this type of violence is not just meant for the people that they do violence against. It's meant to also prevent others from stopping the violence, right?
It's yeah, I think the whole Black men, white women, that's just an excuse, right? It's really a way of maintaining power, maintaining control. You know, it could have been that. They could have picked on some other reason, but it's convenient, and it's a way to maintain power and to and control. Yeah, absolutely.
So Salem, you don't think the system is? You think the system is not?
I clearly we have a problem. In the last several weeks, we've all been reminded that in the United States we have a problem, racism and let's just address racism on the part of the police. But we can talk, we all have, many of us, some of us have had instances, problems with that. But what are some proposed solutions? What can we do?
Well, there are many types of things that we can do, right? So the first thing you have to do is you have to vote and put out legislation to change things. And it's not just on the national level. You have to do it at the local level, right? There are a lot of different local proposals that are going through, and you have to hold the legislators accountable. If you just let them get away with it, then everything slips through the cracks, right? You can't let them continue to just maintain the system as it is. I mean, for myself, I think that's the easiest thing we can all do, right? Is to try to hold these people accountable, to try to make the change. I mean, right now, it's very hard for people to change, right? You have proposals going on right now to get the police out of schools. Think about that. People are fighting to keep the police in school, right? And why is that? And when they're in the school, what are they doing? So instead of having more social workers in the school, you're going to have more police in the school, right? That never ends up good. That never ends up good. And in fact, even with our policing, we should have more social workers. The social workers should be going out to address homeless issues, right? The social workers should be going out with the police, right? To help, mitigate domestic disputes. why do people not call the police, right? People are afraid to call the police because they think, oh my God, if I call the police, they're going to kill somebody. Or if I call the police, they're going to shoot me in my own home, which is a horrible thought, but actually a lot of people had it, right? So yeah, there are many different things we can do. I'm not the answer to everything. All I can say is the best that I in particular can do is to go out and change legislation if I can, and to be aware. I mean, you have to go to these meetings, especially if you have the time to do it, right? We can't all be in all places at once, but if you can sit there and be a voice to stand up to make sure that there's change, that's fantastic.
We have two hands raised, Doug and Deb. And I just refer
Lori
really quickly. He talks about in the book about just I don't know, almost a stereotype of police where they're just, it skews very heavily racist, very heavily guns. And we've actually had conversations about this in Pittsburgh. It's also, I just want to say that there's been studies that show it's not like, police aren't necessary. Not every police is neutral. Not every policeman is neutral. Doug.
Do you want to let Lori go first? I had a question and
I had Deb. Lori, who's Lori?
I had one quick.
Oh, sorry.
My comment to Salem, basically, to go off of what Shawn was saying, one of the things to fix it is to vote, but also to do what Shawn did and get out there and run for something. I really admire that you got yourself on the council.
Thank you.
All right, Doug.
So my question is sort of targeted at the different perceptions that the Black community and the white community have of police. So you mentioned that people are trying to get police out of schools and how it seems like a no-brainer. But in a lot of communities, they see the police as their friends. You know, white communities don't have a police brutality problem. And so they can see the police as their friends, and they can feel that having a police officer at the school is a net benefit for lots of reasons. But, you know, if white people are living in sort of a bubble like that, how do you break through and get them to see that there really is a problem with the way policing is applied between communities?
Yeah, I think particularly in upper class communities, you know, the police are their friends in the schools. My kids go to Winchester Thurston, and I don't know, they have like 2 security guards there or something. And it's like, oh, there's 2 security guards there. But they don't frisk the kids on their way in. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and we were frisked getting into the schools, right? I mean, you had to go through some metal detector. I'm so glad that my kids don't have to go through a metal detector. But in some schools, right, particularly those that are predominantly brown and Black and Latino, the kids have to go through a metal detector every day, right? A metal detector. And there are several police officers in there that are armed, right? That are armed. And there is not a friendly relationship with them, right? These are kids that are afraid of the police. They've seen the police kill their friends. They've seen the police beat their friends. It is not the best of relationships, right? And we have to think about that. So you can't just say, oh, well, let's pull out all the cops in the lower income neighborhoods, but keep them in the upper income neighborhoods, right? It has to be a change of attitude. Who are the cops there to protect? And I do understand that we have a mass shooting problem in the United States, but the problem with the mass shooting probably has more to do with the fact that we have guns everywhere. You know, if we had fewer of those, maybe there wouldn't be a need for people to see that the police are there to protect from now mass shootings. But where does it stop, right? I don't like the idea of the police being in the in the school, because I've seen what they've done. In the Woodland Hills School District, I think there were several issues of the school resource officers, the school police officers abusing some of the kids because they look to them. Remember, the police have just as many biases as anybody else, right? And when they look at these kids, they don't see kids. They see thugs, right? They see half-grown men. When I think about the shooting of Tamir Rice, little 12-year-old boy, but he was tall for his age, right? Cops took 2 seconds to pull out the gun and shoot that child. They shot a child and got away with it. That is horrible, right? If he was to shoot a 12-year-old little child that was white, people would be outraged. How dare you? But they think because he was tall and he was Black that, oh, well, he must have done something wrong. Shouldn't have been standing there with a toy gun in a park. That's why we have to change it. And it won't change as long as people, as long as enough people keep going to the school board meetings and saying, yeah, we want those cops there. There have to be other solutions. Instead of, vilifying people and bringing in more cops, well, let's help people, give them some social programs, create things that people can go to so they can stay out of trouble, so they can stay busy, so that they, some of their, maybe children are hungry. I mean, there are all kinds of issues that people might have.
Okay, so I wanted to, Deb, is your comment connected to the policing and?
No, it has to do with voting.
Okay, because I wanted to say, Tom actually wrote in the chat that in the book, so you want to talk about race, talks about the history of police. The way we had police in the first place was for rounding up slaves on behalf of white owners. And actually, Bryan Stevenson talks about this in his book too, and I did not know that. So from the beginning, it's from the very beginning, which is why I said this system's not broken. This is the foundation. It was exactly the way it was intended to be. We just didn't imagine, or, I don't know if you couldn't imagine the consequences. And I understand, Salem, that you said, how can we fix that, rather than you refuted that. So I apologize for that mishearing. Okay, so Deb.
So I was just going to circle back to something, Shawn, that you said about the importance of voting, which I absolutely 100% agree with. And I just wanted to make the point that in voting, you can also see how policies are structured to disempower, right? So, for example, felons are not allowed to vote, right? And it varies state by state, but in some states, even after you've served your time, if you haven't paid your fees, then you still have not regained the ability to vote, right? What does paying your fees have to do with your having an informed opinion and the value of being able to have that power to vote, right? So, in the way that we treat people in prison and voting rights, and another example, again, with voting is with gerrymandering, right? Which is designed to take people's voice away from them, right? So, we're talking about how this need to maintain power is built into the structures of our society, and it's pervasive in one direction, right? It's all working in one direction to disempower some voices and enable more power in other voices.
Yeah, I mean, even the very fact that we can sit here today and we know that in November, we're voting on a Tuesday and it's not a holiday. Like, you have to still go to work on Tuesday. Why don't we vote on a day when people are not working? Why don't we, whatever day it happens to fall, okay, so make it a Tuesday. Why isn't it that day is off? Right? Because people don't want you to vote. They want you to, and I've noticed over and over and over again with our voting system and who we get to vote for, you can't even find out for your local elections who the local people are that are running. bugs me that there's nothing that's put out. And then you have the people who are in power, whoever they are, for whichever party, right? Whoever's in power, they control the message. And they don't like new people coming in. People get into these positions and they stay there for 50 years. You gotta move on. They never let anybody else get a chance to come in and make significant change. People don't want to change. They want the status quo. They want everything to stay the same so that they can maintain whatever it is they're maintaining. And you have to shake that up.
So we have just a few more minutes left, and I see that Eleanor had her hand raised, and I wanted to see.
Can I ask a quick question? So Shawn, thank you so much for meeting with us. You had mentioned that there were organizations and things that we can do to get involved, and I would love to know what they are and where to get involved, because I do have time, and this is very important to me.
So Olivia just put some links in at the end.
Okay.
At the end of Just Mercy, he also, and maybe Olivia, you could type this in. He says, if you want to get involved, go to his website, and he gives, I guess it's you'll probably find it. Oh, there you go. See, they're much better at this time. So it's the Equal Justice Initiative, or about voting. I just wanted to know.
But I like to get involved with local. Like, we donate to Equal Justice Initiative, and that's how I feel like we can support them. But I'd like to personally get involved, not just give money. So if you know, and I know Sharon wants to move on to a different direction, but if you could share with us at a later point, or share with Olivia and she can share with us some other local organizations where people can get involved, I would greatly appreciate it. And sorry, Rabbi, that was it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I only wanted to ask if anybody wanted to talk about the death penalty, because that's kind of what the book is about. The death penalty and mass incarceration and all of the various vulnerabilities that people have that make the system unjust. And if anyone, I mean, we don't have to, that could be a different topic, but that is kind of what he's doing, that is what he's working on. We do have death penalty in Pennsylvania. It hasn't been used for what? We do have, no, we don't? Yes, we do. We do. It hasn't been used in a long time, but we have one. Yeah, which when I first moved to Pennsylvania, it freaked me out. And I actually thought it would be gone a long time ago, but it isn't. Olivia, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Eleanor's request for a local organization to work with. One of the major injustices that I see in the criminal justice system is the system of bail, where many crimes become quite legal if you have the money to pay to get out of jail. More than half of the people in the Allegheny County Jail have not been convicted of any crime at all. And especially during COVID, it's an incubator, and in a way, a death sentence, a possible one. The people who had, yes, so there's a group called the Bucket Bail Fund, with a K, BUKIT, Bail Fund, who's working regularly on that kind of jail support and trying to end the system of bail. The reform movement, you can find the statements from the RAC, the Religious Action Center, has also spoken out against bail. As a kind of barrier towards freedom. So if you're looking for a place that's doing work like that, who can also direct you further, I would recommend the Bucket Bail Fund, and I'll put the link in the chat.
Also work to try to put people in positions of power, such as the district attorney's office, that are going to try to eliminate cash bail. The person that we have in place right now has not done that and has no intention of doing it, and has once again, I'm from Swissvale, and my school district, we had Antoine Rose in our school district, and he had the way he prosecuted that case was a crime. Once again, a young child killed, and it's seen as acceptable, which is, it should not have to take someone to see themselves in somebody else to feel empathy, right? I don't have to lose my child or see someone that looks like my child to feel empathy for a child that's been shot in the back, right? And so we have to look at those things. When we put these people up, every single time. I noticed that happens here in Pittsburgh a lot. And maybe it's because I'm somewhat of an outsider that I can see it very clearly, but you can't just go with the, oh, well, that person's been a whatever for centuries. Let's get them in another time. I mean, these people die in these positions. It's really tragic. They need to move on and let some young blood and new ideas get in and change things.
Sharon, you were
Yeah.
talking about the death penalty.
Well, I just wanted to know if anyone wanted to talk about it.
Well, no, so the way one of the things I was looking at when we were reading the book is that we're sitting in judgment with people on in the death penalty, and we're putting people to death. And then you're sitting there seeing the pictures of Mr. Floyd laying on the ground with a boot on his neck, and it's the same thing as lynching. So what is the difference then here between the lynching that was done during slavery, after slavery, putting them in jail, and by them I am meaning people of color or Black people. I don't mean it as being derogatory. I'm using it as an idea of that it's lynching, that killing people that are sitting on death row, where the majority of people are young or old men that are Black, African American, people of color.
It's disproportionate. It's definitely disproportionate. It's definitely disproportionate in it's related to population.
So it seems to me that what we're doing when we're putting somebody to death is akin to lynching them. And from what Tom was saying, if you also have looked at 13th, I think that was the name of the documentary on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at that, which I didn't realize, if you look at the amendment itself, the amendment does not just end slavery, but it adds in there that you can then enslave somebody or put them in jail or put them to work if they have broken the law. So here is now your wraparound, the way around ending slavery. You then, as soon as slavery's ended, somebody has, back then it wasn't a broken taillight, but I'm talking about something minor. You then put them in jail. Now you have free labor again, or they've done something wrong. They've done it 3 or 4 times, and now they're being killed, which is the same as lynching them.
There's a really poignant scene in the movie where, and I think this is something that some white people wouldn't have noticed. I mean, I think it was Olivia, or maybe Shawn, you pointed out to me, the giant horses, those horses, the police were mounted on the giant horses. And they were, and I noticed that everyone that looked like slaves, because they're all Black men in uniforms that were crossing the street. Remember that and they said, and I thought, wow, that's slave labor right there. But I didn't catch that the horses were part of the
white men on horses. They have their guns. They look just like, you could transpose a picture of an overseer right there. You could just transpose the picture. They have those on a lot of the, I guess, prison plantations in the South. And some of the, and not just in the South, they have it up here. I mean, up here towards the North too. And they have some of the sheriffs who are in charge of these. And these are usually prisons in which they're getting money. They're for-profit prisons, you know, that it's entirely sustainable. We make our prisoners work for everything. I mean, it is literally slave labor. And no one thinks any of it because someone did some low-level crime. And remember, when it comes to sentencing, there's bias in sentencing, right? So 2 people go up for the same crime and one person gets put in jail for 10 years and the other person, you know, oh, it's okay, you could pay a fine and then you don't have to go, or I'm going to give you a warning. Or they might not go, you know, maybe for a year, maybe for 6 months, maybe just get probation, maybe they're left to leave on their own recognizance, right? You have all of that.
We have all that. We have that with that. It just brings to mind that swimmer in Stanford that what he got nothing. Okay, so Rabbi Bisno, and also I see Ruth Yar has a hand up.
I want to just jump in here at the risk of stirring something up and defend or just make a distinction. Lynching was extrajudicial. Lynching was outside the system. It was taking someone absent a trial and giving them a punishment, rendering a verdict and deeming that they deserve to die for that. Governmental killing, wherein we have a death penalty, is precisely the opposite. It may be as morally wrong to take someone's life, but it's not extrajudicial, which means we need to not conflate the two, and we need to address the problems within the governmental system that allows for the government to kill people. So I think that the conflation is not fair, and it's, with all due respect, it's powerful, but it's not accurate. This is legal killing. This is killing that's draped in the robes of the judiciary and the adversarial system and the right to due process, and it's draped in all of that. And that's the problem. Lynching is illegal. That's clear. You can't lynch someone and get away with it.
Well,
Let me back
it's
up.
not quite
Clearly,
illegal yet.
It's
right?
not. It's not.
Right. I went too far. Absolutely. I just want to make the distinction. Right. I said too much. I only mean to distinguish between that which is extrajudicial and that which is our system and represents us. We, the citizenry of Pennsylvania, have a law on the books that we can decide we want to do differently. I want to speak to something else, Shawn. When you said that these politicians aren't going to give up their long-held positions, the power, that's true of nearly everyone who has power, right? Which is why it was so amazing when George Washington steps down from the presidency and begins to model that. And so what it speaks to is not only needing to vote in better people, but also to mitigate against the enlightened self-interest we all have of wanting to continue and perpetuate our own standing and status. And so we need term limits in all kinds of places to mitigate against the accumulation of too much power in the hands of one person, which then speaks to our need to each of us be willing to put something real on the table. It's gonna crimp our style to have to share more, to have to recognize that we've benefited in ways that, how can we give back? Well, so we may not want to give to national organizations and rather do local, but we should clearly probably be doing more than we're currently doing, right? It should be clear that we have to put more into the skin into the game, pun intended, right?
Okay.
Because it's gonna be uncomfortable.
All right,
we're gonna be voting against if we want to accomplish what we describe, we're gonna have to vote against our own self-interests. And we're gonna have to realize that in the short term, privileged white people are going to be on the short end of the stick, which is a good thing in the aggregate, but it's going to hurt in the immediate.
Mm-hmm.
I want to disagree on one point. I think your major point I agree with, but saying that we have to give back and that white people are going to be on the short end of the stick, it may be true from your own personal perspective, but I think there's a lot of economic arguments to be made for how these measures are the price to be paid for democracy.
I agree. And I think a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's valuable.
Yeah, right.
But the world is more, if you're forgetting for 1 second, the world is more competitive now, and I think it's also the good, is more competitive now for my sons than it was for their grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing in the aggregate, but that means that.
Well, right. So it's a good thing, but there's a cost to that competitiveness, because competitiveness in the job market means that people are sacrificing their living in order to support the profits of the shareholders of a company, right? And that's an economic argument where you may feel like giving the minimum wage forces other people to give up something, but it really is not forcing them to give it up. It's telling them to stop taking it from somebody else.
Yep.
All right, so nice, thank you. Ruth.
I have two things to say. First of all, yesterday I watched a video called The History of White America. It was very different than the history any of us happen to have been taught in school. So I learned in that video that there was not even a concept of white man or black man until it was codified into a law in 1681. It's an amazing video. It's not very long, so if you get a chance, check that out. And my other comment was the person that wants to get involved, perhaps she could contact Marian Damick, who volunteers in the prison system. She does a lot of things getting involved, so that might be a suggestion for you. That's all.
All right, so it is it's running on 8:15, so I don't know, Shawn, if you want to say a last couple of words.
Oh, so I mean, I have really enjoyed getting to speak to everyone. I usually speak to my friends on these issues sometimes, but it's been very eye-opening, listening to what you have to say and your opinions. And I'm glad to be able to show you a little bit of my perspective of what I'm living with, because I think that in order to make change, you actually have to have allies to make changes with you. It does not just happen on your own. I can go out and I can march on the streets every single day, but until people realize that they have something vested in it, in marching, that as long as one of us is treated unequally, we are all treated unequally, then we will never have equality. Right. And so, you know, I'm willing to stand up for everybody, and I hope everybody's willing to stand up for all of us too.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I've learned in the last month or so is that it's a job of a white person like myself to listen to and follow closely behind and support and work with Black leaders. We really thank you for being here. I wanted to just end just a little poetically, because the book is called Just Mercy, and I wondered with Olivia whether that meant just mercy as in only mercy, like is that enough, or is it a play with justice and mercy, and you know, and what does it all mean? And so at the end of the book, Bryan Stevenson is talking about what he said at Walter's funeral, and it's like he spoke and he had like a lot to say, but the part that I wanted to read is just about what it means to have, like, what does mercy mean in the case of this, in this sense that the writer, why he named the book Just Mercy. So he said, I said he had a lot of things to say. He said, finally, and most important, I told those gathered in the church that Walter had taught me that mercy is just when it is rooted in hopefulness, and freely given. So the mercy is just when it is rooted in hopefulness and freely given. Mercy is most empowering, liberating, and transformative when it is directed at the undeserving. The people who haven't earned it, who haven't even sought it, are the most meaningful recipients of our compassion. Walter genuinely forgave the people who unfairly accused him, the people who convicted him, and the people who had judged him unworthy of mercy. And in the end, it was just mercy toward others that allowed him to recover a life worth celebrating, a life that rediscovered the love and freedom that all humans desire, a life that overcame death and condemnation until it was time to die on God's schedule. I recommend the book, because even if you've seen the movie, the book has like beautiful poetic parts like that, and a really deep dive into the reason that people, you know, just all the reasons that people get into the system, and how, you know, just how overwhelmingly, how much work there is still to be done. And even though there has been, the Equal Justice Initiative done tremendous work, there's obviously still work to be done. And I would like to put in a vote for getting rid of the death penalty in Pennsylvania. It's time we did that.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being part of this tonight. And we are going to be doing another book, but in a couple of weeks, but I haven't decided yet, because I thought about doing White Fragility, and then and I knew that it was a problem because it was written by a white person, and then someone pointed that out to me. So I kind of want to give maybe a few choices, but just stay tuned and we'll figure out what we're going to do, what we're going to read next. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being part of the conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.